I'm an environmental and land use attorney, and I should have known better, but water, as most of you know, is so technical and so complex, and there's so many moving parts that this bill became very, very difficult and unwieldy, and then it became elegant, and we passed it. And so I'm not going to talk about it long, but I did want to give you just a very brief overview on what we did with reclaimed water here in Florida. This bill was a conservation bill designed to conserve potable water by providing incentives through certainty to local governments and utilities to produce more reclaimed water. Simple concept. We had a lot of different ways to accomplish this, a lot of different ideas on how to do this. I thought the best way to do it was to remove reclaimed water from waters of the state since it's not naturally occurring. But I see some of my friends in the audience who disagreed with that concept, and eventually we were able to work with all of the environmental groups and come up with a bill that passed nearly unanimously. So what did we do? We went in and basically told the water management districts that they still have some level of control over reclaimed water when state dollars are involved, when it involves regional water supply planning, when we're looking at a big picture. But then in the day-to-day operations of water coming out of a water treatment plant and being put in purple pipes in the cities and counties around the state, the people producing the water are the ones that have control over where that water goes. Okay? And the reason that's important is that these local governments are using taxpayer dollars, scarce taxpayer dollars, to build this reclaimed water infrastructure. And if there is not a guarantee that the water that they are planning to give to their residents, if there's no guarantee that that water will be there, then it's very hard to make the argument that those scarce dollars should be spent. So ultimately, we were able to provide that certainty and predictability in this process. And in fact, in the city of Tampa, where I represent, this bill has already resulted in 3 major projects and or agreements. So we've extended reclaimed water all along Bayshore Boulevard. We have a major agreement in place to provide reclaimed water to an industrial facility at the Port of Tampa, and we're also looking at some smaller uses in the city. So by providing, again, that predictability and certainty in the regulatory process to prevent against some overreaching, we were able to achieve a result that provides conservation of potable water. But I want to just talk very briefly about what happened after session, because it became very clear during the negotiations on this bill that the 2 largest water users in the state, the agricultural industry and water utilities, were not having the level of frank dialogue and discussion about collaboration that they really needed to have. Instead, there was a lot of competition for the resource and a lot of finger pointing, when really we're all working toward the same goal, aren't we? We're working to conserve water. We're working to try and grow the water pie through alternative water supply sources. And so what we did is we convened a working group, and we'll call it a very informal working group, of pretty much every interest in this issue that you can imagine, but primarily agriculture and water utilities. We brought them all to Tampa. We had over 50 people at the meeting, and basically I sat back and said, okay guys, this is your meeting. Let's first talk about the problems and what you perceive are the difficulties, and then let's start brainstorming solutions. And obviously funding was a big one, and I said, well, I want you to pretend like or assume that the state would not have a role. Be creative and start thinking about ways that you could fund these alternative water supply projects. So we spent a few hours doing that, and we may meet again in conjunction with Adam Putnam's meeting with his water group in December. But I just throw that out and let you know that we are having these conversations. No solutions were met. There's no legislation anticipated out of this, but to the extent that as policymakers we can facilitate that type of conversation, I think that's what we need to be doing.
With so many people assembled here that are so very intimately involved in all aspects of water-related activities in the state, it was a little bit daunting for me to come up with information that I thought would be useful to you because, frankly, in my very short 2 years of service, I just recognize the fact that you all have been involved with this process longer than I have. But I will say this. When I was elected to office, my district includes the majority of agricultural land in Palm Beach County and goes up into Okeechobee and Fort Pierce and things like that. And up until 2008, my seat was held by Richard Maychek, a name you might recognize, who was the go-to guy on water in the House during those years. So I had some big shoes to fill. And I volunteered to serve on all the related committees to agriculture and water because I felt that's what my constituency sent me there to learn about and work on, and I did. And to say that I was immersed, pun intended, in that process is an understatement. Now, I'm going to be speaking with you about predominantly the bill that I was able to sponsor and pass, but to pay a little homage to the convention that occurred in Tampa last week and the convention that's occurring now in North Carolina with all the great, political minds getting up and giving you their bluster, I want to just start by saying if we have to have preservation and conservation of water with no aggravation, we need innovation. Thank you very much. There's going to be a lot of experts speaking on a lot of subjects, and I don't know that you need overview from me. But I will tell you that the expanding population, the expanding commercial need for water quality and quantity in the state of Florida has really, moved to the forefront certainly in the committees I've been serving on, and they aren't red and blue issues. It's actually, just crosses over. It affects every single person in this room and every single Floridian. And the combination of funding alterations, we need intelligent strategy. Well, through my service on committee and speaking with a lot of the people who were assembled here, it was explained to me that one of the most cost-effective and most sensible ways to conserve and store water is surface storage, is to store it on the surface of the land. And I asked the question, well, why isn't more of that going on? And it was then explained to me that if, in fact, a private landholder enters into a public-private partnership with a water management district to store water on their land, and a governmental agency, whether it be state or federal, decides that because that water was stored there and there have been some changes in the flora and fauna, it can be designated a wetland and unable to return it to commercial use, a lot of private landowners didn't really want to risk losing their property. I said, we need to find a way to fix that. So, keeping in mind that one of the most important things that we do as legislators is codify. We take things that make sense, but we put them in writing in law so that they can be applied evenly and consistently with nothing that's going to cause the involved people to feel at risk. Now, this bill 1389 that I was able to sponsor and pass, and by the way, it was the very last bill to pass the session, if you recall. It was like midnight on the last day. Now, I don't know if that's saving the best for last or just saving the Democrats' bills for last, but either way, we were able to get that through. And I'm very proud to tell you that it actually didn't have a single dissenting vote. It went through every committee in both chambers, and the floor votes were unanimous. Every single involved entity, the agricultural community, the water management districts, and indeed the environmental community, all agreed that this was something that needed to be done. So, on this handout of what you were given that has next to my name, this idea of agricultural storage, where do we go from here? I've got one more word that rhymes with the original ones, implementation. You see, what we need to do now is make sure that as much use of land that is reasonably affordable by the water management districts be used for water storage and for aquifer recharging. We're in a situation now where the combination of agricultural need, fresh drinking water, land development, the list goes on, have placed a desire for water use that the state just is not keeping up with. That's stated in the very first pages of the handout that you got. We're a little bit behind, and I really believe moving forward that the public-private partnerships are going to move that in the right direction. Now, obviously, water management districts have had some fluctuations in their funding. In our 2011 session, the availability of their funds went down. In 2012, some of the funds were restored, and I'm very much hopeful that it's going to be used in this way to, again, make sure that more water is made available and that there's no mitigation and no concerns or risks to the private landowners. I worked with Representative Young on her reclaimed water bill. I happen to like the color purple very much. It's good to see that around, and I know what that represents. And it was indeed, again, a real learning experience for me. I wasn't really sure what numeric nutrient criteria were just a few years ago. Now I wake up in my sleep mumbling about it. So obviously the process is one that is working and one that is allowing Florida to meet the needs that it has. My last comment in this segment will be simply this. Many of you know that I was not successful in my bid for re-election in my primary, so I will not be returning to the House, and I'm going to miss my great friends here very much. It was a privilege to serve under Chair Chris Foley. We became great friends. We worked very hard together on bills, and the bottom line is what we need to do is make sure that we're all flying in formation. At the end of the day, the public we serve, the Floridians, everyone in this room, we're all here for the same reason, to make Florida great and to make the quality of life for all Floridians as good as we can through this process.
My experience with water issues and water policy goes back a number of years to the time that I was a county commissioner in Columbia County. And as most of you probably know, that north central Florida area is very there are a lot of springs, let's put it that way. We have the highest concentration of first magnitude springs in the world. So not only is it kind of an anomaly, but it also is a huge economic driver for our area. The Itchtucknee River is in Columbia County, and there are people who come from all over the world to spend time on the Itchtucknee River. So that was sort of my initiation into water issues, water policy, was serving on the county commission. And that just kind of naturally progressed as I went to the House and began my work at the Florida House. We deal very closely in the county arena with water management districts. Obviously, because of the sensitive nature of our area, we have to. And so it was also a natural for me to work with water management districts once I got to the House level. Something that we need to understand about groundwater, and then I'll get to the reasons why we came up with this idea of making it more feasible for water management districts to work together, is that the state's water is not confined to districts. Water management districts were established on hydropolitical boundaries, and the waters do not recognize that. Waters flow throughout the state, they flow underground. Even surface water, watershed do not recognize these hydropolitical boundaries. But what we have in place now are divisions, man-made divisions, and it causes sometimes competition as to who controls these resources. It causes competition among the users of these resources, be it agriculture, residential, business. So you have some situations where various water management districts possibly have a little territorial dispute occasionally. But the reality of it is that these waters are state waters. We all have to work together because this is going to affect everyone involved. Water that is taken from the ground in one area can and does affect water resources in other areas. I think we all know that. With the geography of Florida, and particularly in our area, North Florida, we have a situation where we have a very karst geography, and the water does move a lot, and what's pumped out in one area certainly has an effect on what happens in neighboring areas. So once these water management districts were put into place, the situation is that they were, for the most part, autonomous. They made their decisions based on what happened really only within their own political area. Well, now as water continues to be at more and more of a premium, we have learned and recognized that what we do does affect our neighbors, and so we have also recognized that we need to work together. The districts need to work together. And the best way to do this is to allow the water management districts to establish their own minimum flows and levels, which was the greatest part of HB 157. The minimum flows and levels are based on scientific studies, and these are peer-reviewed studies, and they are then adopted, put into place. Well, we had some redundancies. There were water management districts that were neighboring each other who, rather than relying on a study for minimum flows and level designations that had already been done in one district, they would set about performing their own study for a neighboring district. Well, so you have a redundancy there that, number one, you're performing a study that's basically trying to determine the same answer, but you are also spending, as Representative Young said, scarce taxpayer dollars on studies that are looking to come up with the same answer. So you're paying twice for the same study. And then you even have situations where studies are performed which may have conflicting results. They may be based on different science. So our solution to this was that we come up with a fix so that a water management district can and will perform studies, scientific studies, to determine what the minimum flows and levels would be in their district. And then this would be presented to DEP, and DEP would approve it or disapprove it and say, okay, the science is sound, the way this has been done is proper and correct, and we recognize this as legitimate minimum flows and levels. And then other water management districts can use a neighboring district's minimum flow and level findings in order to make decisions on their permitting process. So this it will make things much more smooth, much more efficient. It will save taxpayer dollars, and it also will do what we are all here trying to accomplish in the end, which is conserve and preserve our water. And we have the DEP as the arbitrator, which is really where they should have been all the time, sort of the final say in all of this. And of course, you'll hear more from DEP on the numeric nutrient criteria, but you know, that is their bailiwick, that is their job. And we wound up with a bill. We had a number of work group sessions with all of the interested stakeholders, and we met numerous times throughout the session before we came up with our final rendition of the bill. It did pass unanimously through the House, no dissenting votes. There were some political reasons that it did not make it to the floor in the Senate. Had nothing to do with the bill, and it was nothing that we had any control over. But we do plan on readdressing this bill again in the House this year, and hopefully this year there will be no other political considerations on the side to stall the bill in the Senate.
First of all, I do want to say thank you to Speaker Feeney and Keena Corey and Doug Mann and Jose Gonzalez for putting this together. I think this is what makes this issue even easier for us to deal with. Even though it's not an easy issue, it's a complex issue with quality and quantity, but it's certainly a great opportunity to bring all the interest into the room together and have a conversation about what we're going to do moving forward. And I think that's an important part of being successful in this process, is making sure that everybody has an opportunity to come to the table. I will tell you through the work of my colleagues here, every piece of legislation they just spoke to you about, they spoke with every interest on it in a way that made it so that that piece of legislation had an opportunity to be successful and have an opportunity to have buy-in from other members, whether it be in the House or in the Senate. Unfortunately, as Representative Porter mentioned, sometimes politics plays a stronger role than the policy, and hopefully we can continue to move past that in the next few sessions. But a few things that I think that we may see this coming session or the session after that are certainly Representative Porter's bill, what was last year's House Bill 157. She spoke in depth about that. I will not get in depth on the legislation that I see coming down the pike, and again, there's no reason I'm saying this. Nobody's talked to me about any of this legislation. This is simply a thought of what we could potentially see. I will tell you, I think we'll see the ocean outfalls bill again. We've seen it for the past few years. It seems to make its way through a couple of committees and hits its typical roadblocks, but I think there will be a continued effort to work on that issue. The repealing of the upcoming ban on the land application of septage, which was House Bill 115 last year, I would suspect would come back to the forefront. And then I certainly believe that Representative Williams' bill, which Representative Williams, for those of you who do know or don't know, was the resident professional from a professional standpoint in her business, but she was the resident professional on water issues in the House. She had her own select water policy committee. Many of you probably worked with her. I certainly believe that we're going to see her bill that she had for the 30-year permit come back in this coming session, and looking forward to seeing what comes of that. Possible new issues, I believe that Representative Williams' bill on the public-private partnership development of water and wastewater projects bill will probably come back before us. Certainly believe the development of statewide water quality credit trading program to provide a method to meet new nutrient criteria in the most cost-effective manner possible. I think that you're going to see something along those lines come back before the legislature this year. I do believe that I see my friends from the fertilizer industry over here. I certainly believe that we're going to have another preemption bill come before the legislature this year. This is an issue that's starting to take legs nationwide. I believe there's 26 states now around the country that have gone in this direction, including as of recently Virginia and New Jersey. And in fact, New Jersey actually took on the Florida turf rule as their kind of their baseline and has been touted for doing that, and that speaks volumes for what we've been able to do in Florida. And I'm looking forward to seeing where we end up on that legislation. I know that I see some county folks here today, and again, folks, this is us coming together. This is us having a conversation and trying to find a common ground on how we can work on these issues. I believe Speaker Feeney said in his opening remarks, it's about common sense approaches, and I think for us to be successful in this process, especially with issues as deep as this is, we need to use common sense approaches, use the science, and be able to work together to try to find a common good for our state. With that, I also believe that we're going to certainly see, an initiative to move forward on some of our funding issues. I know we've worked real hard in the past few years to make sure there's money in the hybrid wetland systems. That's an important project that's been taking place. There's been significant results shown from those programs, as well as water supply and development and infrastructure funding moving forward. There's going to be an opportunity with the bonding money from Florida Forever to find programs that we can work on. I certainly believe that there's opportunities to work on those initiatives moving forward to make sure that we are putting projects in place. And it's not about starting projects, but it's certainly about finishing projects. And I think that's what we need to concentrate on. At the end of the day, it benefits each and every one of us in this room, as well as the constituency of the state of Florida. So with that, I'm certain that through this process today, there will be more objectives that can be approached as we move forward, but I certainly believe that this process that's taken place is certainly beneficial for us as legislators as well as for you to find ways that we can help better and move forward the state of Florida on the issue of water quality and quantity. So again, thank you for having us. Thank you for being here today, and look forward to any questions you might have.
We'll start with the first question. It's not directed to anyone in particular, from Mary Jean Yan, Audubon, Florida. We can all hopefully agree that preservation and conservation of our water resources is critical if we want to ensure adequate supply for all users. AWWA notes in their brochure that household water bills will go up. In addition to paying for infrastructure, this has the added benefit of encouraging users to conserve water. How do the panel feel about triggering this water ethic in this manner? And the water, I'm assuming pricing. Who would like to take that on?
We're going to let Representative Furman.
Yeah,
okay.
Just because,
You could say anything
anything I want?
Yeah.
Wow, be careful what you wish for, sir. We take a lot for granted as far as the availability of water. We turn on the faucet and there it is. And I think that it really does have to be part of the culture in Florida moving forward to have more respect for the fact that water is indeed a finite resource. So the idea, if I understand the comment and the question properly, I really believe that one of the most important initiatives we can make is to educate the public moving forward regarding this precious resource. Again, anytime you take something for granted, you almost are certain to accelerate the use of it, and as a result of that, do without it in the future. So the best response I can give is that if there were a message that could diffuse to the public, even through the schools, through public outreach programs, to encourage our citizens to be more respectful of the finite amount of water we have, I think that would go a long way to making sure that we do have the ability to accumulate more water, do things like aquifer recharge, do things like Everglades restoration, do the things that we need to do in a way that people will feel engaged in the process. I want the public to actually feel a sense of ownership, a sense of responsibility for participating in the conservation process for water in Florida moving forward.
I would not necessarily agree with the premise of using pricing as a tool to curb people's water use. However, if the cost of the resource increases because of measures to conserve, educate, then sometimes that is a necessary evil. But I wouldn't necessarily say that, that I agree with what some might consider price fixing just strictly for the purpose of curbing the water use, particularly in an economy such as we face right now, because we have a lot of struggling families who are just trying to make ends meet, and that's just one more expense for a very necessary basic resource that some of these families can't absorb.
Our next question is directed at Representative Porter. With the major staffing cutbacks at the Water Management District, will this have an impact on the structure and implementation of House Bill 157?
No, it really should not have any effect, because this is simply an understanding between water management districts. In actuality, it will be saving taxpayer dollars and taking a little bit of the burden off the water management districts, because they will not have to be performing duplicate studies, and some of the burden will be shifted to DEP. I know the DEP folks in the room will love to hear that, but some of the burden would be shifted to DEP, just as as the arbitrator of the indecision of whether or not the minimum flows and levels for a particular district are indeed scientific, peer-reviewed, and qualified. So no, it should not have a negative effect on the districts.
With the sources for spring flows and many MFLs dependent upon maintaining water levels in the Floridan aquifer, the Central Florida Ridge, where 3 water management districts intersect. How will the state support small utilities on the ridge to get access to alternative sources of water to offset aquifer impacts due to the district and regional withdrawals?
Well, I would say we have a big room of smart people, and hopefully we can work that out. No, I mean this comes down to to dollars and cents, and I think moving forward, as we understand that the issue of supply is certainly a concern for our state, as we start to come out of this recession, move back into a pattern of probably some small growth in these areas, there's going to be a balance of water usages for development as well as for the small utilities. I will say that I know we're not meeting our allocations on our consumptive use permits in the ag industry as well as in the energy industry. In fact, I think we've even come down a little bit in the past couple of years as far as the usages go. So, I know that there's going to be a balance that we have to strike there, but this is going to be an issue that's moving forward. I can honestly sit here and tell you that I don't have the answer for it. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, and there needs to be an understanding of how we can meet this need.
Okay, and I will add just a small statement to that, and that is within House Bill 639, the Reclaim Water Bill, there was a very technical section dealing with impact offsets and substitution credits. And without going into a lot of detail on exactly what that is, it does allow for a reasonable sort of trading scheme of credits between users of potable water and potential users of reclaimed water. So for example, if you have an industrial user that is using an allocation under its CUP of potable water for something that could be otherwise a reclaimed water use, and if it were in a water use caution area, there is the ability under House Bill 639 for the utility to provide the reclaimed water to that industrial user and then utilize their allocation of groundwater under the CUP. So I know that's a little bit complicated, but in our informal working group, the conversation kind of went on an interesting turn in that those provisions of that bill may be the hook by which we could start some of these public-private collaborations on how do we allocate this very limited resource. And so it may be one of the creative solutions that we've been looking for in areas where otherwise we may be hamstrung from a regulatory perspective. So that's out there. That's something that very, very smart people are working on that know a lot more about this than me. So there we go.
Regional interconnection of utilities to share and better manage the resource may be beneficial, but at times locally politically challenging. How can this be encouraged or incentivized from the state?
Well, look, I'm all about incentives, and I am not about mandates. So to the extent that we can provide incentives for regional authorities to work together, for utilities to work together by way of allocations or, as I said, substitution impact credits and things like that, then there will be, I think that there is a desire to work together. To look at it in a broader picture, you've got, again, the utilities and the agricultural interests are the largest water users in our state. And to the extent that they can work together without perhaps inhibiting their ability to withdraw water when they need it, they can look at some of the allocations that aren't used and do some trading or working together with those levels. I think that there is a lot of potential, but we need to be open to regulatory changes if that's needed to provide that cooperation, because I think that it benefits everyone when we're dealing with a scarce resource. Let's work together rather than throwing stones and litigating.
Understanding that population is increasing, creating more need for water, what thoughts and ideas do you have to protect agricultural water use in the future?
Well, ironically, Mr. Fletcher and I have talked multiple times about this issue, and this is certainly a concern because I can tell you the agricultural industry is not going anywhere. If anything, the ag industry is finding new opportunities, whether it's energy crops or whether it's winter vegetables or what have you. I mean, heck, we're growing peaches now in Florida. Who would have ever thought? But I will tell you that there is going to continue to be a fine balance. As I had mentioned earlier, I've seen some recent numbers as far as the allocations versus the usages go. And listen, more than anybody, the ag community doesn't want to be wasteful with the water. They know it's a resource that's needed to make sure that their products continue to thrive. Agriculture obviously is a big part of the economy. I like to say it's the foundation of our economy. A lot of people say it's a pillar, but it's truly an industry that's been here from the beginning of time and will continue to be in the state of Florida for a long time to come. So finding that balance is going to continue to be the challenge that we have to meet as a legislature and also as interested parties on this issue. But at the end of the day, folks, people have to eat, and we're going to have to find that balance. And as we try to look for opportunities for more storage, opportunities for water, whether, and for that matter, whether it's new opportunities to get water through desalination or what have you, we have a conversation to have. And I will tell you, agriculture is certainly going to be at the table. They're going to be a cooperative partner, and they want to be, somebody who's a good neighbor. So hopefully, moving forward, we'll be able to continue to work together on this issue.
In our agricultural working group meeting, Janet Llewellyn from DEP was there talking about the CupCon, and I thought it was significant that one of the regulatory initiatives that DEP is pursuing as one of their first-tier initiatives is not penalizing farmers and agricultural users for not using all of their allocation. And by that I mean that if an agricultural user is given a certain level under their CUP and through best management practices and just general good stewardship of the land, they are only using half of that, they should not be penalized and required to give up that extra 50% of their allocation. And so DEP recognizes that and recognizes that for the most part the farmers in our state are the best stewards of the land, and they are looking to make sure that they are not penalized for those best management practices.
In your legislation, is there any provision to address the variable nutrient content of reclaimed water? All reclaimed water is not equal. Some has more nutrients than others. So I think that's the question. Does the legislation speak to that?
The short answer is no, and the reason is that the nutrient levels in water and what the requirements are for water coming out of treatment plants is already taken care of in other water regulations and water legislation. So it was not needed in this legislation, and we did not see any reason to put that in.
Do the panel members view conservation as a legitimate alternative water supply? And if so, would you support funding for water conservation programs?
As I mentioned before, I don't look at it as an alternative water supply. I look at it as a water strategy. That the idea that if in fact there is a way to enhance the public's awareness of conserving water, that will actually add to the overall supply. I mean, that's just, sort of a common sense thing. I didn't mention in my original comments, but going in the direction of trying to elevate the public's awareness of water issues and water conservation, one of the legislations I was able to get through last session was the establishment of April 7th of each year as Everglades Day, so that there would be a statewide observance that actually causes people to stop and think a little bit about the fact that we have this resource that we need to be respectful of and responsible for. I would think that most people walking around aren't aware of the fact that the freshwater replenishing supply for the whole lower half of Florida, over 6 million residents, comes from the Everglades. So I think that again, not as a supply but rather as a strategy, I believe we will have more water in the long run if the public is brought up to a level where they understand the importance of conservation.
I think that we need to look at, well, let's just first say that the water issue is a very complicated issue, and I don't think there is any one solution that's going to fix it. We need to look at this as a multi-pronged approach. We need to look at conservation. We need to look at education. We need to possibly look at desalination. We need to use the emerging technologies that we as Americans come up with every day, and we need to put these toward our future needs and have a very, unfortunately, complicated approach to a complicated problem. But as the chair said, there are a lot of smart people in this room, and there are a lot of smart people working on this problem, and I think with a combined effort and a combined approach to this problem, we're Floridians, we're smart, we'll get it, we'll find the answer.
Conservation, whether it's through conservation easements or what have you, it brings winners to both sides. You're putting properties back on the tax rolls. You're utilizing property. You're putting a plan in place, through BMPs, and it's certainly an advantage to take that direction. It isn't a new supply. It's just simply a way to move forward and find a way to be creative. And I think this is what it's come down to for us as this state continues to grow in population. We're going to need to continue to find ways to balance this. This kind of takes us back to the ag community, because the ag community, they're the landowners. We can't, afford to push the landowners to the limits to where, they go in a direction that ultimately a lot of people in this room don't want them to go. We want our ag community to be successful in what they do, so I think it's important that we find ways to encourage them through, whether it be conservation easements or water storage programs or what have you, to be successful in those ways as well. So I think that saying it's a new water source would be, kind of outside the box. I think it's just an existing water source, but it's a new way to plan to find ways to utilize that.